The Latin script that we use to write English and many other languages today has a rather bizarre origin. Its usefulness cannot be overstated, but like many helpful things, it seems that it came about by accident. Today, I'm going to talk about the alphabet's evolution that began inconspicuously with an abstract picture of an ox in a turquoise mine in ancient Egypt. The earliest record of a written language comes from Sumer in ancient Mesopotamia and dates to the Bronze Age. Sumerian was the language spoken by the civilization there. This was a language isolate, meaning it's not thought to have been related to any other linguistic groups. From around 2900 BCE, the Sumerians developed a syllabic writing system for their language, which we now call cuneiform. These symbols were pressed into wet clay tablets using a wedge-shaped stylus. Cuneiform was made up of logograms, with each sign representing a spoken word, a phonetic syllable, or a determinative. Eventually, other languages that developed in the region, such as Akkadian, Elamite, Hittite, and Hurrian, started using this cuneiform script. Over in ancient Egypt, at around the same time, a writing system using hieroglyphs was evolving for the ancient Egyptian language, an extinct branch of the Afro-Asiatic language family. Hieroglyphs are mostly figurative, representing what they look like. However, they can also be logograms or represent a sound similar to how an alphabet works. It's been argued that the Mesopotamians may have inspired the ancient Egyptians to begin writing down their spoken words, but such a connection is difficult to prove. But essentially, in the Bronze Age, two distinct writing systems matured in both Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, and these were both mostly made up of symbols that represented words or syllables rather than individual letters like the modern-day Latin alphabet, which obviously had its restrictions. Both of these written scripts had many symbols to memorize and were not that easy to create. They certainly were not accessible to everyone. Not that that would have been an issue for the elites, but it's that lack of accessibility that likely initiated the creation of something much simpler. Around 1900 BCE, during ancient Egypt's Middle Kingdom, a series of turquoise mines in the mountains of southern Sinai started operating on an industrial scale. There are records of numerous expeditions to these mines at el-khadim by pharaohs and extensive groups of workers. Copper and malachite were also mined in the area, and over time chapels and stelae sprung up along the routes to the mines and in the areas surrounding them to cater to the religious needs of the many visitors to the region. el-khadim actually translates as columns of the slave and refers to the many stelae inscribed with hieroglyphics that surround the Temple of Hathor at the site. This temple was established during the reign of Senusret I and was in use for hundreds of years. It underwent a partial reconstruction during the New Kingdom. el-khadim is around 10 kilometers north of another archaeological site called Wadi Magara, which was known to the ancient Egyptians as the Terraces of Turquoise. As the name suggests, it was also an important turquoise mining site during the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms, and many pharaonic monuments and an Old Kingdom settlement have been found there. In 1917, Egyptologist William Flinders Petrie and his wife Hilda discovered graffiti in and around the mines whilst on an archaeological expedition. This graffiti was etched into rocks rather than the formal stelae that were inscribed with hieroglyphs, and it appeared to be vastly different in appearance. Flinders Petrie was convinced that the script was the first alphabetic system to be discovered. After studying the inscriptions, he recognized the Canaanite word Balat, the female counterpart to Baal, and a possible equivalent to the goddess Hathor, who was worshipped at the temple there. Egyptologist Alan Gardner was also able to translate some of the graffiti. However, a 25-centimeter Sphinx figurine found inside the Hathor temple would become the Rosetta Stone of this particular situation. It was etched with two inscriptions, one in hieroglyphs and one in the strange graffiti. The first read the beloved Hathor, the mistress of turquoise, and the second read the beloved of Balat. It became apparent that the strange script was in fact a simplified version of hieroglyphs, but instead of a sign representing a word or a syllable, it represented a letter only. This is the first known alphabetic script, and was named by scholars as Proto-Sinaitic. In subsequent years, further trips were made by scholars to the site to identify further inscriptions so that a larger body of material could be used for decipherment. It's most likely that these graffiti first appeared during the reign of Amenemhet III in the Middle Bronze Age. There is some debate as to who made these inscriptions, who invented the alphabet at these turquoise mines in the Sinai desert. The general consensus is that it was created by Asiatic people, most likely of Canaanite origin, who it's known worked the mines at that time. There are various records of Egyptians living in the Eastern Delta region who discussed their mixed parentage, since it was also the home to many Asiatic people. The mention of a Canaanite goddess in the inscriptions also supports this idea. Furthermore, the crude and inconsistent form of these early letters also suggests that it was the workers themselves rather than the more senior people in the hierarchy at the mines who made them. Since they would have been barely literate themselves, it's quite likely that the graffiti was their way of writing down their own Semitic language without having to learn the full hieroglyphic writing system. In the book The Proto-Sinaitic Inscriptions and Their Decipherment, written by William Foxwell Albright in 1969, it says that the first inscription of the category now known as Proto-Sinaitic was discovered and copied by E.H. Palmer in Wadi Magara during the winter of 1868 to 1869. The text was not published until 1904 and seems subsequently to have eluded rediscovery. As I mentioned above, Wadi Magara is 10 kilometers south of Serabit and was also an important turquoise mining site that was in use from an even earlier date in the Old Kingdom. It's a shame that these inscriptions have not been rediscovered there, and I wonder if they may have been made before those at Serabit. In 1993, similar inscriptions to those at Serabit el-khadim were discovered in the Wadi el-Hol near Luxor. The inscriptions consisted of 2 lines carved into limestone rocks in the valley. At first, it was thought they might be older than those at Serabit, but scholars now think that they were made later, probably by miners who had travelled from Sinai to the Wadi el-Hol. It took a long time before alphabetic scripts caught on, and it's not clear exactly how the graffiti left Sinai to start its evolution into the Latin script we have today. It probably travelled with Canaanite caravans, but what is clear is that it became a formal writing system for several languages over the next few millennia, and each time changed form slightly. It was adopted by the Phoenicians and then the Greeks before morphing into the Latin script. Here are a few examples for how different letters evolved from that early graffiti. The letter A is thought to originate from the Egyptian hieroglyph depicting an ox and meaning ox. The turquoise miners created a simplified version of this for their sound alp, which eventually morphed into the Phoenician aleph and the Greek alpha before becoming the first letter of the Latin alphabet. The letter H started its life as the Egyptian hieroglyph for a fence before becoming the Proto-Sinaitic Hasra, the Phoenician heth, and the 7th letter of the Greek alphabet eta. The letter K originates from the Egyptian hieroglyph for a hand. It then morphed into the Proto-Sinaitic K, Phoenician kaf, and the Greek letter kappa. O started out as the hieroglyph for I, which became the Phoenician ayin and the Greek omicron. I do find it rather interesting that the miners created this writing system essentially for their religious needs, rather than using it for practical reasons. The majority of the inscriptions that have been found were dedications and sacrificial texts. But when reading some of these, I noticed that in a lot of cases, the person writing the text is asking for the chief miner to procure and sacrifice an animal on their behalf. So this means that these workers were able to communicate with one another and their boss, so to speak, via this writing system. It seems to have become more than a simple informal type of communication within the turquoise mines. I find that pretty fascinating. Anyway, that's it. Thank you for watching. Please hit the like button if you didn't already. Thank you to my patrons and channel members, and I'll see you next time.